Welcome to a very special edition of our podcast, Healthy Kidneys After 60. I am your host, Jane Pauley, and tonight we are stepping away from the usual headlines to look at something far more intimate, something sitting perhaps right now on your bedside table or in your kitchen cabinet. Many of us reaching our golden years believe we are doing everything right by following our prescriptions and trusting the labels we see in the pharmacy aisles. But what if the very things we rely on to keep us moving and comfortable are silently taxing the most vital engine of our lives? Joining me today is a man who has spent over half a century looking at the human heart from the inside out. Dr. Michael Kent, a renowned cardiac surgeon who has performed over 20,000 procedures, is here to pull back the curtain on the medications that might be betraying us. Dr. Doe, Kent, it is an honor to have your wisdom with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jane. It is truly a privilege to be here and to speak directly to a generation that I have spent my entire career serving. I must tell you, sitting here in this studio feels a bit different from the operating theater, but the urgency I feel is exactly the same. After 50 years of holding human hearts in my hands, I have seen a disturbing pattern that I can no longer ignore. My heart is full of gratitude for this opportunity to share what I have witnessed, not to cause panic, but to offer a sense of empowerment and clarity to those who might be unknowingly putting themselves at risk every single day.
Dr. Kent, I want to start by acknowledging that incredible career of yours. 50 years in medicine is a lifetime of observation, and 20,000 patients mean you have seen 20,000 stories written in the anatomy of the heart itself. Many of our listeners are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they often feel like they are doing their best to navigate the complexities of aging. They take their pills, they follow the advice of their specialists, and they hope for the best. Yet you have mentioned that you have seen perfectly healthy-looking people walk into your operating room with damage that was not caused by time or disease, but by something else entirely. Could you take us into that moment when you realized that the common medications millions of Americans trust are actually playing a dangerous role in the decline of their cardiovascular health?
It is a realization that has haunted me for many years, Jane. When you are standing under the bright lights of an operating room and you open a chest, you expect to find the wear and tear of a life lived, perhaps some clogged arteries from a poor diet, or the effects of genetic predisposition. But over the last 2 decades, I started noticing hearts that looked different. They were bogged down, heavy with fluid, and struggling with a kind of weakness that did not fit the patient's medical history. I would look at the charts and see people who were supposedly healthy, only to find that they had been taking high doses of common over-the-counter pain relievers or other seemingly innocent drugs for years. It was as if their hearts were being drowned from the inside out. I remember one specific moment looking at a heart that just could not sustain its rhythm, and I realized that the pharmaceutical industry has been very successful at making us feel that certain pills are as safe as candy. But for someone over the age of 60, there is no such thing as a truly harmless pill.
That is a chilling thought for anyone who reaches for a bottle of Ibuprofen when their back aches or takes a cold pill to get through a long day. It feels like there is a disconnect between what we see in the commercials, with people running through fields of grain, and the reality you see on your surgical table. Why is it that the medical community at large, and even the public, seems so unaware of this connection? Is it simply a matter of these drugs being around for so long that we have become complacent? Or is there something deeper about how these chemicals interact with an aging body that we are just beginning to understand?
It is a combination of both complacency and a fundamental misunderstanding of geriatric physiology. When these drugs are tested, they are often tested on younger populations whose kidneys and hearts have a massive reserve capacity. But after 60, that reserve begins to thin. Your kidneys do not clear toxins as quickly, and your heart muscle becomes a bit stiffer. In 2005, the FDA actually demanded much clearer warnings on non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs regarding heart attack and stroke risks. Yet how many people actually read those tiny pamphlets that come with the bottle? Almost nobody. We live in a culture of convenience where we want an immediate fix for every discomfort. Doctors are also rushed. They have 15 minutes with a patient, and it is much easier to refill a prescription for a stomach protector or a painkiller than to spend an hour discussing the intricate ways those chemicals might be stressing the patient's blood vessels or depleting their magnesium. I have sat in my office after long days of surgery and felt a heavy sense of guilt, wondering how many of those 20,000 hearts could have been saved from the knife if we had just been more honest about the cumulative cost of these medications.
Your honesty is quite profound, and I think it is exactly what our listeners need to hear. It sounds like you are saying that the very tools we use to maintain our quality of life might be the ones secretly stealing years away from us. When you talk about the heart being drowned or the blood vessels being stressed, it paints a very vivid and frightening picture. As we move through this conversation, I want us to really dig into the specifics, because for someone sitting at home, this isn't just medical theory. It is about their life, their ability to play with their grandkids, and their future. If we are to stop this silent attack, we have to know exactly where the danger is hiding.
You are absolutely right, Jane. This is not about fear-mongering, it is about life-saving truth. Every time I see a patient who is struggling to breathe because their heart is failing, and I find out it was triggered by a common medication they took for a simple headache or a bit of arthritis, it breaks my heart. We have been told these are safe, but after 60, the rules change. The body's ability to handle these synthetic compounds is not what it used to be. I want everyone listening to understand that you have the power to protect yourself, but that power starts with knowing which bottles in your cabinet are the ones you need to question. I have seen the damage with my own eyes, heart after heart, and I refuse to stay silent because the cost of silence is measured in human lives. We are going to look at these 5 specific categories of drugs today, and I promise you, by the end of this hour, you will look at your medicine cabinet in a completely different way. It is time we start treating our hearts with the exquisite care they deserve after decades of faithful service.
It is so common as we age to wake up with that familiar stiffness in the knees or a dull ache in the lower back that just won't go away no matter how much we stretch. For many of us, the immediate and most logical response is to reach for those brightly colored bottles of ibuprofen or naproxen that we have trusted for decades to keep us mobile and active. We see our neighbors doing it. We see the commercials on television promising a pain-free life, and it feels almost like a necessary ritual of getting older. But I wonder, doctor, when does this routine transition from a helpful habit into a silent threat? And how does a person who thinks they are just managing their arthritis suddenly find themselves in a cardiac emergency room without any warning signs at all?
You have touched on the heart of the tragedy I see so often, Jane, because the danger is hidden behind a mask of normalcy and routine. I remember a gentleman named Marcus, a 72-year-old retired veteran living in Atlanta, Georgia, who spent every morning in his beautiful rose garden. Marcus was the salt of the earth, but his knees were bone on bone from years of hard work, so he took naproxen almost every single day just to be able to kneel down and tend to his plants. To him, it was just a tool, no different than his garden shears. One humid afternoon, Marcus noticed he was unusually tired, his breath was short, and when he looked down, his ankles had swollen to nearly twice their size, stretching his skin until it was shiny and red. He thought it was just the Georgia heat, but by the time he got to me, he was in acute heart failure because those innocent-looking pills had forced his body to retain massive amounts of salt and water. His heart, which was already working harder due to his age and a bit of high blood pressure, simply couldn't push that extra volume through his system anymore, and it began to fail right there among his roses.
That story of Marcus is so heartbreaking because he was doing something he loved and using a medication that is available in every grocery store in the country. It is terrifying to think that his heart was essentially being pushed to its breaking point by the very thing he thought was helping him stay active. When you explain the mechanism of how these drugs interfere with the kidneys and blood vessels, it makes me realize how little we actually know about what happens inside us after we swallow a pill. Is there a specific threshold or a certain way people use these medications that makes the risk skyrocket? Or is it a cumulative effect that builds up over the years until the heart simply cannot compensate any longer?
It is a combination of both dose and duration, Jane, but the most frightening part is that for an older heart, the margin for error is incredibly slim. What many people do not realize is that nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or NSAIDs, block the enzymes that produce prostaglandins, which are the chemicals that protect the lining of your stomach and keep your blood vessels open. When you suppress those chemicals daily, like Marcus did, your blood vessels constrict and your kidneys start holding on to fluid as if you were dehydrated, which sends your blood pressure skyrocketing. For a young person, the heart can handle that temporary spike, but for someone over 60, it is like redlining an old engine for hours on end. Eventually, something is going to blow. I have seen patients who were also taking low-dose aspirin to protect their hearts, not realizing that taking ibuprofen at the same time actually cancels out the aspirin's protective effect entirely, leaving them wide open to a heart attack. It is a chemical tug-of-war happening in the bloodstream, and the patient is usually the last to know until they are gasping for air in the back of an ambulance.
It sounds like a perfect storm where the patient is trying to do the right thing for their pain, but unwittingly destroying their cardiovascular defense system. If a heart is already dealing with the natural stiffness that comes with 7 decades of life, adding that extra fluid pressure must be like trying to run a marathon with a heavy backpack you can never take off. For the millions of people who feel they cannot function without some form of pain relief, is there a way to navigate this without choosing between a life of agony and a life-threatening heart condition? Or are we truly stuck in a lose-lose situation as we age?
No, we are certainly not stuck, but we have to change the conversation we have with our doctors and ourselves. The solution starts with honesty and moving away from the pill for every ill mentality that has dominated our culture for so long. I often tell my patients to look into topical anti-inflammatory gels that work locally on the joint without entering the bloodstream in high concentrations, or even considering acetaminophen if the liver can handle it. If an NSAID is absolutely required for a flare-up, the golden rule must be the lowest possible dose for the shortest possible time, perhaps just 2 or 3 days instead of weeks or months. Marcus eventually recovered, but he had to give up those daily pills and learn to manage his garden differently, focusing on physical therapy and anti-inflammatory foods. We have to stop treating these drugs like candy and start treating them like the powerful, life-altering chemicals they truly are, because your heart deserves a chance to beat without being drowned by the very medicine you thought was your friend.
It seems like we have entered an era where taking a pill for stomach acid is as common as taking a multivitamin, and many people in their 60s and 70s have been on these medications for years, if not decades. We have been told that preventing heartburn is essential, not just for comfort, but to prevent long-term damage to the esophagus. So we swallow these proton pump inhibitors every morning without a second thought. It is almost ironic to think that something meant to protect one part of our digestive tract could be causing a silent electrical crisis in our hearts. How is it possible that a drug designed for the stomach could end up destabilizing the very rhythm of our heartbeat? And why are we only now starting to hear about the dark side of these blockbuster medications?
The irony is indeed bitter, Jane, and it stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of why we have stomach acid in the first place. Nature didn't put acid in our stomachs just to cause us pain. That acid is vital for breaking down minerals and vitamins so our bodies can actually use them. When we use drugs like omeprazole or lansoprazole to completely shut down acid production long-term, we are essentially shutting down the gateway for essential nutrients. One of the most critical minerals affected is magnesium, which I like to call the guardian of the heart's rhythm. Without enough magnesium, the heart's electrical system becomes unstable, much like a computer with a frayed power cord that keeps flickering on and off. I have seen so many elderly patients come in with mysterious arrhythmias, feeling like their heart is skipping a beat or fluttering in their chest, and they are terrified they are having a heart attack when the reality is that their stomach medication has starved their heart of the minerals it needs to stay steady.
That image of the heart as an unstable computer is so vivid, and it makes me wonder about the millions of people who just accept that fluttering feeling as a normal part of getting older. They might tell their doctor they feel a bit dizzy or tired, and perhaps they get a prescription for even more medication, never suspecting that the root cause is sitting right there in their medicine cabinet in the form of a little purple pill. Beyond the mineral deficiency, is there an even deeper physiological impact on the actual structure of our blood vessels when we suppress our natural chemistry for such long periods of time?
There is a growing body of evidence that is deeply concerning to those of us in the cardiac community. Several large-scale observational studies, including some from the most prestigious institutions, have found a significant association between long-term PPI use and an increased risk of heart attacks. One theory suggests that these drugs might interfere with the production of nitric oxide, which is a tiny molecule that tells your blood vessels to relax and stay flexible. When nitric oxide levels drop, your arteries begin to harden and stiffen, creating the perfect environment for a blockage to form. It is a slow, invisible process of calcification that you cannot feel until it is too late. Furthermore, for those who are already on blood pressure or antiplatelet medications like clopidogrel, these stomach drugs can actually block the effectiveness of the heart medication, leaving the patient completely unprotected despite their best efforts to stay healthy. We are seeing a generation of people who are over-medicated and underprotected because we have trivialized these drugs as lifestyle accessories rather than potent medical interventions.
It feels like we are peeling back the layers of a very complex onion, and each layer reveals a new way that our modern approach to health might be backfiring on us. If the very thing we take to protect our stomachs is making our arteries brittle and our heart rhythms chaotic, it suggests a profound need for a shift in how we manage something as common as acid reflux. For the person who has been on these medications for 5 or 10 years and feels they can't eat a single meal without them, what does the path back to safety look like, and how do they begin to restore that delicate balance without causing a massive flare-up of the symptoms they were trying to escape?
The first and most important step is to never stop these medications abruptly, as that can cause a rebound effect where the stomach produces even more acid than before. You must work with your physician to slowly taper the dose while simultaneously addressing the lifestyle factors that are driving the reflux in the first place. Many people find that by changing their diet, losing a bit of weight, or simply not eating 3 hours before bed, they no longer need the heavy-duty chemical intervention of a PPI. We also need to be much more diligent about monitoring mineral levels. If you must be on these drugs, your doctor should be checking your magnesium and B12 levels regularly. I want people to understand that these drugs were originally intended for short-term use, maybe 4 to 8 weeks, to heal an ulcer or severe inflammation, yet they have become a permanent fixture in the American diet. We have to reclaim our health by realizing that a bit of indigestion might be a signal from the body that needs to be listened to, rather than a symptom that needs to be silenced at the cost of our heart's long-term survival.
We often think of medical emergencies as sudden, dramatic events that happen out of nowhere, but as you have been explaining, Doctor, they are often the result of years of small, quiet choices that finally reach a breaking point. It is easy to ignore a slight tremor in the chest or a moment of lightheadedness when we are busy with our daily lives, especially when we believe we are taking the right steps to stay healthy. I want us to look at a real-life example of how this internal depletion manifests, because it is one thing to talk about mineral levels and another to see how it actually changes a person's life and their sense of safety in their own body. How does a routine checkup turn into a revelation that everything a patient thought was keeping them well was actually putting them in grave danger?
It brings to mind a patient of mine named Helen, a 68-year-old woman living in Scottsdale, Arizona. Helen was a vibrant person, very health conscious, but she had been suffering from chronic acid reflux for nearly a decade. Her doctor at the time had put her on omeprazole and told her she would likely need it for life, and Helen, being a compliant patient, never questioned it. She felt great for years, but eventually she started noticing that she felt strangely breathless during her morning walks, and sometimes her heart would feel like it was flopping in her chest like a fish out of water. During a routine physical, her doctor noticed her heart rate was irregular and ordered an electrocardiogram. When the results came back, the electrical patterns were chaotic. We did blood work and found that her magnesium levels had plummeted to a dangerously low level. Helen was shocked because she ate a balanced diet and thought she was doing everything right. She didn't realize that the omeprazole had built a chemical wall in her stomach that prevented her body from absorbing the very minerals her heart needed to beat in time.
It is so unsettling to think of Helen, someone so diligent and careful, unknowingly starving her heart while she thought she was protecting her health. That image of a fish flopping in the chest is something I think many people can relate to, but they often dismiss it as stress or just the anxiety of aging. When you discovered that her magnesium was low, was it as simple as giving her a supplement, or had the long-term use of the medication created a more complex situation that required a complete overhaul of her medical regimen? And how do we help people recognize these subtle signs before they find themselves in a situation where their heart's electrical system is on the verge of collapsing?
With Helen, it was a wake-up call that required a very careful transition. We couldn't just throw magnesium supplements at the problem because as long as she was on the high-dose PPI, her absorption remained compromised. We had to slowly wean her off the stomach medication while using safer alternatives like H2 blockers and significant dietary changes. But the real work was emotional, Jane, because Helen felt betrayed by her own medicine. She had to learn to trust her body again. The warning signs are there if we know how to look for them: unusual muscle cramps, a persistent feeling of fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, and those skipped heartbeats. These are not just signs of getting older. They are often the body's way of saying it is missing a vital ingredient. I tell my patients that if you are over 60 and you have been on a stomach pill for more than a few months, you must ask for a nutrient panel. Don't wait for the palpitations to start. Helen eventually regained her heart's steady rhythm, but she narrowly avoided a life-threatening arrhythmia that could have caused sudden cardiac arrest.
It really highlights the importance of being an advocate for our own health and not just accepting a prescription as a permanent solution without periodic review. Helen's story is a powerful reminder that our bodies are integrated systems, not a collection of separate parts where we can fix one thing without affecting another. If there is one thing that listeners take away from her experience, it should be that the forever prescription is a myth that needs to be challenged, especially when it comes to drugs that alter our internal chemistry. How can we encourage people to have that difficult conversation with their doctors, especially when the doctor might be the one who prescribed the medication in the first place?
It requires courage, but it is a conversation that could save your life. You have to go in and say, "Doctor, I've been on this medication for years and I'm concerned about how it's affecting my heart and my mineral absorption. Can we reevaluate if I still need this, or can we try a lower dose?" A good doctor will welcome that engagement. We have to move away from the idea that the doctor is the only one with the answers. You are the expert on your own body, and if you feel that something isn't right, if you feel that flopping in your chest like Helen did, you have to speak up. The medical system is overwhelmed, and sometimes the easiest thing for a physician to do is hit refill on a screen. You have to be the one to hit pause. Helen is now doing wonderfully, managing her reflux with diet and only occasional medication, and her heart is as steady as a drum. Her story has a happy ending, but it serves as a critical warning for the millions of others who are still taking those pills every single morning without realizing the electrical storm they might be brewing in their own chests.
There is something so deceptively simple about a common cold. We feel miserable, our noses are blocked, and we just want a quick way to breathe again so we can get back to our lives. Most of us have a favorite brand of cold and flu medicine that we have used for years, and it never occurs to us that something so routine could be a hidden trigger for a major cardiac event. We trust these over-the-counter remedies because they are sold everywhere, but for an older adult whose heart might already be under stress, that magic relief from a stuffy nose can come at a devastating price. Can you help us understand the hidden danger in these everyday remedies and why a simple cold could suddenly turn into a life-threatening emergency for someone over the age of 60?
The danger lies in the very chemicals that make those drugs so effective at clearing your nose. I'm talking about decongestants like pseudoephedrine and phenylephrine. Their job is to constrict blood vessels in your nose that shrinks the swollen tissues so you can breathe, but the drug doesn't know to stay only in your nose. It travels through your entire bloodstream, narrowing arteries throughout your body. I remember a patient named Margaret, a 75-year-old retired school teacher from Boston, Massachusetts. Margaret was a sharp, active woman who caught a nasty winter cold. She went to the pharmacy and bought a well-known multi-symptom cold liquid that contained a high dose of pseudoephedrine. By the second day of taking it, Margaret didn't just feel better, she felt like her heart was trying to kick its way out of her ribs. Her son found her in her kitchen, pale and sweating with a headache so intense she could barely see. When she got to the hospital, her blood pressure was over 200 and she had developed a dangerous heart arrhythmia. That cold medicine had pushed her heart to the absolute brink of a stroke or a heart attack.
It is terrifying to think that Margaret was just trying to feel better so she could go about her day, and she ended up in a life or death situation because of a liquid she bought at a drugstore. It seems like these medications act as a powerful stimulant, almost like an unwanted jolt of adrenaline to a system that isn't prepared for it. For someone like Margaret, whose heart had already been serving her faithfully for 75 years, that extra resistance in the blood vessels must have been like trying to force water through a pinched garden hose. Is this a risk for everyone as they age, or is it specifically dangerous for those who already have a history of high blood pressure or heart disease?
While it is dangerous for anyone with existing hypertension, the risk is significant for all older adults because of how our blood vessels change over time. As we age, our arteries naturally become less elastic, so when a drug like pseudoephedrine tells them to constrict, they don't bounce back as easily. This causes the blood pressure to spike much more dramatically than it would in a 30-year-old. Furthermore, these drugs are stimulants that can directly interfere with the heart's natural pacemaker. Recently, European health agencies have even issued new warnings about pseudoephedrine because of its link to rare but serious syndromes involving blood vessel constriction in the brain. If it can do that to the brain, imagine the stress it puts on an aging heart muscle that is already fighting against the resistance of stiffened arteries. Margaret was lucky. We were able to bring her pressure down and stabilize her rhythm, but she was inches away from a catastrophic event. She told me later she had no idea that a simple cold medicine could be so powerful. She thought if it was on the shelf, it was safe.
That belief in the safety of the shelf is so pervasive, and it is something we really need to dismantle. We assume that because we don't need a prescription, the risks are minimal, but Margaret's experience proves otherwise. It sounds like for seniors, the better choice is to endure the discomfort of a cold or find alternative ways to manage the symptoms. If someone is sitting at home right now with a stuffy nose and a cough, what are the safer paths they can take that won't put their heart in the crosshairs of a chemical stimulant? And how can they differentiate between a product that is safe and one that contains these hidden vasopressors?
The first rule is to read the fine print on every label and look for those specific names, pseudoephedrine and phenylephrine. If you see them, put the bottle back. Instead, look for saline nasal sprays, which use only salt and water to clear the passages, or use a humidifier to keep the air moist. There are also nasal steroid sprays that act only locally in the nose and do not enter the bloodstream in significant amounts. I also tell my patients to embrace the old-fashioned remedies, hot tea, rest, and patience. A cold is a temporary nuisance, but a heart attack or a stroke is a life-altering event. Margaret now carries a list of forbidden ingredients in her purse, and she never buys a medication without checking it against that list. She learned the hard way that her heart safety is far more important than a clear nose. We have to stop looking for the fastest fix and start looking for the safest one, because after 60, your heart simply doesn't have the room for those kinds of chemical gambles.
As we continue this journey through the hidden dangers in our medicine cabinets, we move into a territory that is often very delicate, the world of mental health and chronic pain management. Many people in their 70s and 80s suffer from persistent nerve pain or long-term depression, and the medications used to treat these conditions have been around for a very long time. We tend to trust things that are familiar, but sometimes that familiarity blinds us to the very real side effects that can occur as our bodies change. It is not just about the heart's rhythm this time, but about how these drugs can affect our balance and our overall stability, leading to accidents that can be just as deadly as a heart attack. Can you talk about this older class of medications and why they pose such a unique threat to the safety and longevity of an aging heart?
We are talking about tricyclic antidepressants, drugs like amitriptyline or imipramine. While they are still used today, it is often not for depression, but for neuropathic pain, that burning, tingling sensation in the feet that is so common with diabetes. I think of a patient named Frank, a 78-year-old man from Chicago, Illinois. Frank was a tough guy, but the pain in his feet was keeping him from walking his dog, which was his greatest joy. His doctor prescribed a low dose of amitriptyline to help him sleep and dull the pain. It worked for the pain, but Frank started feeling off. He felt dizzy every time he stood up from his recliner, and one morning he stood up too quickly to answer the door. His blood pressure bottomed out, and he fainted. He fell and fractured his hip, a tragedy that so often begins a downward spiral for people his age. The culprit was the medication. It caused something we call orthostatic hypotension, where the heart and blood vessels can't react fast enough to a change in position, leaving the brain momentarily starved of oxygen.
That is such a common and yet devastating sequence of events, a simple fall that leads to a broken hip and a total loss of independence. It is frightening to think that a medication meant to help with pain could actually make a person so vulnerable in their own home. It seems like these drugs are doing something to the heart's ability to regulate itself on a second-by-second basis. Beyond the dizziness and the risk of falling, what is happening to the heart's internal electrical system when it is exposed to these tricyclic compounds over a long period of time? Is there a risk that goes beyond just the blood pressure and touches the very core of how the heart beats?
Yes, and that is what concerns me most as a surgeon. These drugs can actually slow down the electrical impulses as they travel through the heart muscle. On an EKG, we see a lengthening of certain intervals, which means the heart is taking too long to reset itself between beats. This creates a window of vulnerability where a stray electrical signal can trigger a lethal arrhythmia called ventricular tachycardia. It is a state where the heart beats so fast it cannot pump blood, leading to sudden cardiac death. For someone like Frank, his heart was already under stress from his age and his diabetes, and adding a tricyclic antidepressant was like throwing a wrench into a delicate clockwork mechanism. These drugs also tend to speed up the resting heart rate, which means the heart is constantly running a little too fast, never getting the chance to truly rest. It is a state of chronic cardiovascular stress that many patients just misinterpret as anxiety or simply the feeling of being old.
It sounds like Frank was caught in a very dangerous trade-off where he got relief from his foot pain, but at the cost of his stability and his heart's electrical safety. It makes me wonder how many people are currently taking these medications for sleep or for pain, unaware of the hidden tax they are paying with their heart health. If these drugs are no longer the first choice for depression because of these risks, why are they still so commonly prescribed for pain? And what should a person like Frank or his family be looking for to catch these side effects before a fall or a heart event happens?
They are still used because they are inexpensive, and in many cases they do work for nerve pain when other things fail. But the cost is too high for most seniors. If you or a loved one are taking these, you have to watch for that telltale dizziness when standing. That is the first and loudest warning sign. You should also be getting regular EKGs to monitor your heart's electrical intervals. Frank's hip fracture was a high price to pay for pain relief. Today we have newer classes of medications that are much safer for the heart, though they may be more expensive or require more careful titration. I tell my patients, your mental health and your physical comfort are vital, but we must find ways to achieve them without compromising your heart's rhythm or your physical balance. Frank eventually moved to a different medication, but he had to go through a long, painful rehab for his hip first. We want to prevent that rehab by choosing the right medicine the first time. Your heart's electrical system is a precious thing. Don't let an outdated medication disrupt its song.
We have spent a lot of time talking about prescriptions and over-the-counter drugs, but there is another category of things we put into our bodies that we often view as completely benign or even purely beneficial. I am talking about the supplements and health foods that are marketed so aggressively to the over 60 population. We are told we need more of this and more of that to keep our bones strong and our minds sharp. And in our quest for longevity, we might be overdoing it. It is a confusing world for a consumer. One day a supplement is a miracle cure, and the next there are whispers that it might be clogging our arteries. How do we navigate this sea of information when the very things that are supposed to be natural or healthy might be contributing to the calcification of our most vital organs?
This is perhaps the most controversial area of modern medicine, Jane, because it touches on the things people do with the best of intentions. We have been told for 40 years that as we age, we must take calcium supplements to prevent osteoporosis and keep our bones from becoming brittle. Millions of women in particular take high-dose calcium pills every single day like a religious ritual. But the scientific community is now looking at a very troubling pattern. When you take a large concentrated dose of calcium in a pill, it creates a massive spike in your blood calcium levels that the body doesn't know what to do with. Unlike the calcium you get from eating a bowl of yogurt or a head of broccoli, which is absorbed slowly and naturally, the supplement dump is artificial. Your bones can only take in so much at once, and that excess calcium has to go somewhere. Unfortunately, that somewhere is often the walls of your arteries.
That is a terrifying thought, that the very mineral we are taking to keep our skeletons strong might be turning our flexible, pulsing arteries into rigid, stone-like pipes. We think of calcium as the building block of life, but what you are describing is a process of internal petrification. It feels like a betrayal of everything we have been taught about preventative health. Is there a clear scientific consensus on this, or are we still in the middle of a heated debate? And for the person who has been told they have low bone density, how do they weigh the risk of a hip fracture against the risk of a heart attack caused by these calcium deposits?
The evidence is complex, and you are right that it is a subject of intense debate, but the signals are too strong to ignore. Several major studies, including one that followed thousands of patients over a decade, have suggested a modest but significant increase in heart attack risk among those taking calcium supplements. The hypothesis is that these artificial spikes in calcium promote arterial calcification, the formation of plaques that eventually rupture and cause a heart attack. However, calcium from food sources has never been linked to this risk. In fact, it seems to be protective. The body handles food differently. It has the cofactors and the slow delivery system it needs to put the calcium where it belongs. For someone with diagnosed osteoporosis, the balance of risk and benefit is a delicate medical decision that must be made with a cardiologist and an endocrinologist in the room. It is not something you should be deciding on your own based on a commercial you saw on late-night TV.
It really comes back to that idea that more is not better, which is so contrary to the American way of thinking. We want the extra strength and the maximum dose of everything, thinking it will give us an extra edge against aging. But it sounds like when it comes to the heart, balance and moderation are the only true paths to safety. If we can't trust a simple calcium pill, it makes me wonder what else we are taking that might be doing more harm than good. How should we be rethinking our entire approach to supplementing our health as we get older, especially when our bodies are becoming less forgiving of these massive chemical influxes?
We have to return to the kitchen and move away from the pharmacy. The best way to protect your bones and your heart is through a diet rich in whole foods, leafy greens, sardines, dairy if you tolerate it, and nuts. These provide calcium in a form your body recognizes and can manage. I also tell my patients to look at vitamin K2 and vitamin D3, which act like traffic cops, telling the calcium to go into the bones and stay out of the arteries. But even then, you have to be careful with doses. We have medicalized aging to such a degree that we've forgotten that the human body is an incredibly sophisticated machine that mostly just needs the right raw materials in their natural state. I have seen so many healthy people with arteries that look like chalk on an imaging screen, and when you ask them, they've been taking 1,200 milligrams of calcium supplements for 20 years. It breaks my heart because they thought they were doing the right thing. My advice is simple. If it comes in a pill, treat it with caution. Your heart worked for millions of years before these supplements existed. Trust the food that fueled it for most of your life.
It is so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that because we are doing one thing right, we are protected from everything else. We see people who exercise, who don't smoke, and who watch their cholesterol, yet they still end up with significant heart issues that seem to defy logic. This brings us back to that idea of the silent accumulation of risk, the things we do every day that we don't even count as medicine, but that are profoundly changing our internal landscape. I want to talk about how these habits, even the ones born out of a desire to be healthy, can lead to a sudden and shocking crisis. How does a person who seems to be the picture of health end up on your operating table, and what can we learn from their experience to protect ourselves before we reach that point?
I think of a patient named Linda, a 70-year-old woman from Miami, Florida. Linda was an inspiration. She walked 3 miles a day on the beach. She was lean, she never smoked, and her blood pressure was perfect. But Linda was terrified of osteoporosis because her mother had suffered terribly from it. So for nearly 15 years, Linda had been taking high-dose calcium supplements, often even more than the recommended amount, thinking she was shielding her bones. One morning in the middle of her beach walk, Linda felt a crushing weight on her chest. She couldn't believe it. She thought it was just a bad case of indigestion because she was too healthy for a heart attack. When she was brought to me, we found that her coronary arteries were severely narrowed, not by the typical soft cholesterol plaques we see in smokers, but by hard rock-like calcium deposits. Her heart was being choked by the very mineral she had been diligently swallowing every morning to protect her skeleton.
Linda's story is such a powerful and tragic illustration of what we have been talking about. She did everything by the book, yet the book she was reading was missing a critical chapter on the heart-calcium connection. It must have been such a shock for her to realize that her healthy habit was the very thing that led her to your care. When you see a heart like Linda's, where the damage is so physical and so rigid, is it possible to reverse that process, or is the goal simply to manage the damage and prevent it from getting worse? And how can we help people like Linda understand that their insurance policy of supplements might actually be a liability?
It is very difficult to reverse arterial calcification once it has reached that stage. We can bypass the blockages, as I did for Linda, but we can't easily melt away the stone that has formed in the artery walls. That is why prevention is so much more important than the most brilliant surgery. For Linda, the lesson was one of balance. We had to stop the supplements immediately and focus on getting her calcium through a Mediterranean-style diet. But more importantly, we had to address the fear that drove her to over-supplement in the first place. I tell my patients that health isn't a score you win by having the highest levels of everything. It's about harmony. If you are taking a supplement because you are afraid of a specific disease, you might be ignoring the broader impact on your entire system. Linda's case taught me that we need to be screening for coronary calcium more aggressively in people who take these supplements, using tools like a CT heart scan that can actually see those deposits before they cause a heart attack.
It seems like the small habit that could save us is actually the habit of questioning our routines and being more mindful of the balance within our bodies. Linda's experience really highlights the need for a more holistic view of aging, where we aren't just focusing on one organ at a time. If someone is listening to this and they have been taking supplements for years, feeling like they are doing the right thing, what is the first small, manageable step they can take today to move toward a safer, more balanced approach to their health without feeling overwhelmed by fear?
The first step is to take every single bottle out of your cabinet, prescriptions, vitamins, herbs, everything, and put them in a bag. Take that bag to your next doctor's appointment and have a brown bag review. Ask the doctor, why am I taking this? Is there a risk to my heart that we haven't discussed? Can I get these nutrients from my food instead? Most people are taking things they no longer need or that are actively clashing with each other. For Linda, simply stopping the pill and switching to a diet of leafy greens and small fish made a huge difference in her blood chemistry within months. We have to stop being passive consumers of health products and start being active partners in our own biology. Your body is a masterpiece of equilibrium. It doesn't need you to force feed it minerals. It just needs you to provide the right environment for it to thrive. Linda is back to her walks now, but she's doing it with a lot more wisdom and a lot fewer pills, and her heart is finally getting the rest it deserves.
We have covered so much ground today, from the dangers of common painkillers and stomach protectors to the unexpected risks of cold medicines and even the supplements we take for our bones. It can feel a bit overwhelming, perhaps even a little frightening, to realize how many potential pitfalls are hidden in our daily routines. But as you said at the beginning, Doctor, this isn't about fear, it's about empowerment. We want our listeners to feel that they have the tools to navigate their later years with confidence and vitality. As we look toward the future, what are the fundamental golden rules that can help a person over 60 protect their heart while still managing the very real aches and pains that come with a life well lived?
The most important rule is to realize that your body at 65 is a different biological machine than it was at 35. You have to respect its new boundaries. One of the most powerful things I can share is the results of recent longitudinal studies from institutions like the Mayo Clinic, which emphasize that the polypill approach, where we just keep adding drugs to fix side effects of other drugs, is a recipe for disaster in the elderly. The golden rule is simplification. Every time a new medication is suggested, ask if there is a non-pharmacological alternative first. Can physical therapy replace that ibuprofen? Can a change in diet replace that omeprazole? We often forget that the body has an incredible capacity to heal if we stop interfering with its natural processes. I have seen thousands of patients, and the ones who thrive into their 90s are almost always the ones who take the fewest medications. They treat drugs as a last resort, not a first response.
That idea of less is more is so profound, especially in a world that is always trying to sell us more. It requires a certain amount of bravery to step back from the conventional path and ask those hard questions. It also seems like we need to be much more vigilant about the basics, the things we often take for granted, like our blood pressure and our heart rhythm. In your decades of experience, what are the simple daily checks or habits that provide the biggest return on investment for heart health? And how can we make them a natural, stress-free part of our lives?
It is as simple as becoming a student of your own pulse and your own pressure. I encourage every senior to have a reliable blood pressure cuff at home and to use it once a week, not when they are stressed, but when they are calm. Keep a log. If you see your pressure creeping up after you start a new cold medicine or a painkiller, that is your heart giving you a direct warning. Listen to it. Also, learn to feel your own pulse. If it feels like it's jumping around or beating too fast while you're just sitting and reading, don't ignore it. These are the early whispers of the heart before it starts to scream. Another golden piece of advice is to stay hydrated with plain water. So many of the cardiac issues I see are exacerbated by chronic dehydration, which makes the blood thicker and harder to pump, especially when those medications are already stressing the kidneys. If you do these three things, simplify your meds, monitor your vitals, and stay hydrated, you are doing more for your heart than any miracle supplement ever could.
It is so heartening to hear that the most effective tools are also the most accessible. We don't need expensive equipment or a medical degree to pay attention to our pulse or to choose water over a sugary drink. It brings the power back to the individual, which is exactly what this podcast is all about. As you look back on those 20,000 hearts you've held, what is the one truth you wish you could whisper to every person as they celebrate their 60th birthday? What is the secret to a heart that doesn't just keep beating, but keeps thriving well into the sunset years?
I would tell them that their heart is a faithful servant that has never taken a second off since months before they were born. It deserves your respect and your protection. Don't let a common pill or a safe supplement be the thing that finally breaks its spirit. Your heart can't speak with words, so it speaks through your breath, your energy, and your rhythm. When you take a medication without questioning it, you are silencing that voice. The secret to a thriving heart is to be its guardian. Be picky about what you let into your bloodstream. Be skeptical of the quick fix. And most importantly, never lose hope. Even if you've made mistakes with your medications in the past, the heart is remarkably resilient. If you start making better choices today, if you go home and do that brown bag review, your heart will respond. It wants to keep going as much as you do. Give it the clean, stress-free environment it needs, and it will carry you through many more beautiful years of life.
As we draw this conversation to a close, I find myself thinking about the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the body that carries it. We have talked a lot about risks and dangers today, but beneath it all is a deep sense of hope. We have the power to change our narrative, to look at those bottles in our cabinets not as masters of our health, but as tools that must be used with extreme care. Dr. Kent, you have given us so much more than medical advice today. You have given us a new way to value our lives and the hearts that sustain them. It is a reminder that every day is a gift, and how we treat our bodies is our way of saying thank you for that gift.
It truly is about gratitude, Jane. After 50 years in the operating room, I have learned that the most beautiful thing in the world is a heart that beats steadily and strongly on its own. I have seen the fragility of life, but I have also seen its incredible strength. My message to everyone listening is this: you are not a victim of your age. You are the curator of your own longevity. The aches and pains of getting older are real, but they don't have to be the end of your story. When you choose to be informed, when you choose to ask the tough questions, you are taking a stand for your future self. I want you to be able to walk those miles on the beach like Linda, to tend your roses like Marcus, and to teach your grandchildren like Margaret. Those are the moments that make life worth living, and they are worth every bit of effort it takes to protect your heart. Thank you so much for letting me share these stories. It has been one of the most meaningful conversations of my career.
And thank you, Dr. Kent, for your courage in speaking out and for the decades of service you have given to so many thousands of patients. You have reminded us that we are all partners in this journey of health. To our listeners, we hope this episode of Healthy Kidneys After 60 has touched you and perhaps inspired you to take a second look at your own medicine cabinet. Remember, your heart has been with you through every joy and every sorrow of your life. Now it is your turn to be there for your heart. If you found today's conversation valuable, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our upcoming episodes, where we will continue to explore the most vital truths for thriving after 60. Share this podcast with your friends, your siblings, and your parents. You never know whose life might be changed by hearing these stories.
It is a ripple effect, Jane. One conversation leads to another, and before you know it, we are changing the way an entire generation thinks about their health. I am so hopeful for the future. Before I go, I just want to leave you with 3 simple thoughts to carry in your heart. Stay curious, stay active, and stay mindful of what you swallow. Your heart is a masterpiece. Treat it like one. Thank you for listening, and please take wonderful care of yourselves. You have so much more life to live, and your heart is ready to take you there.
What a beautiful note to end on. Thank you again, Dr. Kent. And to all of you at home, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. We are here every week to bring you the stories and the science that matter most for your golden years. Until next time, I am Jane Pauley, wishing you a steady heart and a peaceful mind. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Healthy Kidneys After 60.